Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to FACEIT's Challenger Invitational. We are now in the second best of three, and the second game of the second best of three, with Unicorns of Love, and also SK Gaming. And Unicorns of Love picked up another game against another high-caliber team.
I have to say, I don't think I've ever been so happy to be wrong on my presumptions coming into a tournament.
Yeah.
I mean, again, we both discussed coming into the tournament which teams we thought were going to be the strongest, and I don't think we'd be, too wrong to have said that people coming into this tournament would have expected Unicorns of Love maybe not to have got past Cloud9. That sounds quite disrespectful, but thankfully, the opposite has happened. And Unicorns of Love have proved us all wrong. And I think we're starting to see, as we see them in more games, actually how good a team they are.
We're at the start of the season as well, so there are a lot of new challenger teams coming into the scene, and it looks like Unicorns of Love are definitely going to be in the top 4 at the very least. I mean, they've taken down Cloud9, who were considered to be one of the best, if not the best, in the EU Challenger circuit.
It's possible, but I think the one thing that we're seeing this entire weekend and have been seeing for the past few weeks is how close all of the challenger teams are. So the fact that we thought we'd seen all of the best teams, and then another team is like, yeah, we're actually good enough to beat the ones you think are the best teams right now, just shows how volatile Challenger is right now and how close everybody is in Challenger teams in Europe.
Absolutely. So what happened in the first game? What went wrong? Well, they didn't necessarily do anything bad. It's just that they kind of just got outplayed.
Yeah, I mean, Unicorns of Love found themselves with a slight lead coming out of the laning phase. All of their lanes had gone consistent, had at least gone even, if not ahead. And the problem for SK Prime was they had got to a point where both mid and AD were strong enough that they needed to be itemized against. And Unicorns of Love just had so much damage that was mixed that they couldn't itemize against it. So even after picking up a Baron from a Miracle Steal, which was a fantastic play out of SK, and an inhibitor, they didn't have the resistances required to fight the team fight, so they needed to win to close the game out.
Yeah, they'd just gotten too fed from those previous engagements where the spike in gold and the spike in items just didn't really help because they had to invest all that Baron gold into Negatron cloaks for Orianna, who had already picked up a Void Staff at that stage. So it was helping them against that, but they were just too far behind at that stage.
And that's a difficult situation to be in because, again, SK Prime didn't do anything particularly wrong either. It was actually a game of two teams that were fairly consistent throughout the entire game. A couple of fights here and there were a little bit shaky from both teams, I think is fair to say. There were times where Unicorns of Love would overextend in the bottom lane, and also times where SK would pick fights where Pantheon would die pretty quickly, which, as we alluded to, is because he couldn't get the resistances from his build. But again, both teams were very consistent and had their leads in the game, but Unicorns of Love just kind of won out in a game of consistency.
Now heading into the second game, I don't feel the Pantheon, well, it was good in the sense that it could steal Baron, but it didn't do much else apart from that. I mean, it's a good pick, but it's a more risky pick. I mean, we're only just seeing Pantheon and new junglers head into the meta, and we are jumping back into Champion Select picks and bans for the second game in this series, and we'll see exactly what they bring out.
I think one thing to look at with the Pantheon was he ended up coming out of the jungle on quite low health. Very early on, Vi found him in the top lane and forced a flash out. That meant that he couldn't be as aggressive as he would like to be in the early game, and that's where Pantheon's biggest strength will be on accelerating through the game, is getting those early kills, being aggressive in the early game. If Vi ends up being the one being aggressive in the early game, which is a very unlikely situation that ended up happening, Pantheon will start to fall behind.
Yeah, and something's definitely gone wrong with Vi's the one counter-jungling the Pantheon. So that's what happened in the early game. But we do have some bans coming out. Yasuo Kale, from what we saw from the first game, followed by Kha'Zix and Kasten, again, from what we saw from the first game in those bans. Very similar. I
don't think we'll actually see a departure from the first game bans. At least will be another ban that I would expect out here, and I'm trying to remember the final one off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure it was another mid laner, but we will see as this goes on. I'll be reminded. It was Annie was the final ban because that wasn't available. Vi actually banned away by Unicorns of Love here after playing it.
It was a pick that I guess they just don't want to give away to the opposing team with SK. But we don't really need any targeted bans from the last game because no one did anything wrong. It wasn't anything in terms of picks that made them lose the game. maybe Pantheon, but there's no point banning it out if you're just not going to pick it.
Yeah, and Pantheon only has certain strengths that are available to him. Elise will be the final ban. So Annie is available in the support role for this game. We'll see whether either team decide to pick Annie up. Waiting on the first pick here. There's quite a few options available to pick up here in the first pick. We've seen Gragas as a first pick from a few teams, but then that kind of opens up a lot of the counters to Gragas. Also, Lee Sin has been a highly contested pick for the jungle here as well. So there are a lot of options that Unicorns of Love can go with, and being a fairly unknown team, what do they go with? And they go with something consistent in Renekton.
Okay. I mean, it's a pick that's going to work regardless of what's picked against it. It opens up Mundo, it opens up Shyvana, but most likely we're going to see the Mundo against that. There's no reason why they wouldn't pick that against the Renekton top lane, and therefore they can just kind of leave it until last.
I think it's fine here, because they know that Vizicachi specifically is very comfortable on Renekton. We saw him come out ahead in lane against Dr. Mundo, which is something that can be a little bit tricky to do on Renekton, is possible. We saw it in the previous game. But typically, on paper, you wouldn't write it down that it would go that way. It would be a close lane for sure, but typically you'd expect Mundo to end up with more CS and a little bit better effect on the late game. But Vizicachi had a great game on Renekton in the last game.
That initial early kill really hurt the Mundo. After that, he couldn't catch back up again, and he just basically stayed on top of him, and he really couldn't do much from that point. So in response, we're going to take a look at the Fresh, followed by the Gragas, and the Gragas are going to be locked in. Again, very good to pick up very early on, because there are some, well, quote-unquote counters, but, you know, they're not something that will push Gragas completely out of lane, and same thing when we see Fresh.
Well, we've seen mixed success for Gragas here this weekend. Obviously, the Orianna in the previous game for Zodiaz was a pretty good way of combating Gragas' effect by saying, I'm just going to have effect as well. Meanwhile, down in that bottom lane, we see Thresh picked up. Could see the Leona in response. Wouldn't be too surprised by that either, because it was a great game out of Hylasang in the previous game where they just knew when to engage. And Solar Flare just provided the great counter engage for when SK thought they had a pick.
And it changed so well into ganks as well, so they can pick any sort of aggressive jungle. Last time they had Vi, they banned that out themselves, so we're not going to be seeing that this game. But there are a plethora of other junglers who can perform exactly the same role. So we'll see exactly what SK do in response to that. So they picked up their support, they picked up their mid laner. What are we expecting to see?
Well, it's about this time that I'm expecting to see the jungler out, and then they'll probably look to counterpick top. Jungle isn't really a counterpick kind of role where you get somebody that hard counters, because there's not a lot of time that one jungler will face another jungler straight up. That's particularly if you're counter jungling. So I'd expect to see a jungle pickup here for SK Prime. They could go for their top laner, but then that kind of leaves jungle for last, and when you have a counter pick available, usually better to use it. It looks like they're going to hover over Mundo.
They're hovering over Vayne as well, and that's actually been locked in. Yeah. So we haven't seen Vayne just yet, and often if we do see Vayne, it's probably alongside Fresh for the extra peel.
It's also probably alongside Aframu as it's double lift playing it.
Yeah, I mean, we just don't really see that too much outside of double lift, but we'll see exactly what that does this game. They've also picked up the Gragas, so they've got kind of like pseudo peel in that respect, and they've got the Mundo top lane, which is no small surprise.
I would be a little surprised to see them lock in Olaf here. Normally, you pair Olaf with a move speed steroid, such as On the Hunt, or indeed Talisman of Ascension, but Leona tends to like to pick up the Targon's Brace and go in towards Face of the Mountain, so you're less likely, unless Leona is building Talisman, to have that movement speed boost. It's not essential for Olaf, it's just very complementary to his kit. I would be a little bit surprised to see an Olaf blind into a jungle here, as there's a few jungle options that are available, but Unicorns of Love have proved us time and time again when we've thought one way that it is in fact the other.
It doesn't seem to matter how much we theory craft about them, they just end up winning anyway. Yes. So we'll see exactly how that works out. That's going to be the Olaf lock-in, even though there is no speed steroid. Of course, he can't pick up the Talisman of Ascension himself because it would just vastly be inefficient.
And also,
he used to pick up the Turelias.
Doesn't work with the conservation passive now.
Right, exactly. So there's no real point in picking that up at all. And as a result, it's going to be looking at the last pick, which will be their top laner. No,
yeah,
not the top laner.
I think Ziggs here is a good pick against Gragas. We've seen Ziggs Gragas time and time again. Ziggs will shove Gragas in, and it's another good lane, I have to feel, for Zodiaz, that it's consistent. He can get damage. He will always be useful in the team. And with this mixed damage, they kind of assume that Zodiaz will do well in lane. And that's a Zed lock-in. So
that's going to change the position of Gragas, meaning that the theory crafting we did about the Ziggs and the Gragas matchup is going to be different.
Right.
But that's why they picked the Zed.
I was going to mention it could have been Gragas jungle earlier, but because it's only MYM that we've seen do that, it wasn't the biggest factor as we didn't see a jungle lock-in subsequently. Now I see it, and Zed versus Ziggs is not a matchup that we've seen all that much. We know that Unicorns of Love are very consistent, and I wonder whether Zodiaz will be safe enough in that middle lane against the Zed.
I want to see how this jungle works, because previously we've only really seen very few junglers run Gragas jungle. He's very specific, and not many people have just picked him up for this very reason.
Yeah.
And necessarily may not have the jungle mechanics, but Perry is definitely not a jungler I've seen on Gragas before.
And I think the other thing to look at here is, again, Gragas' explosive cask will have good utility in the fights, but Olaf won't be affected by that. So Olaf will get through. It just depends on how many of the rest of the team get affected by the explosive cask. We'll kind of see how this one goes. There's a couple of different champions that we tend not to see so much currently in the meta. You look at Olaf, you look at Vayne, and Zed specifically is not played often in the meta unless you're, Faker.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, same thing with Vayne is like if you're double lift, then sure, if you're playing Akali, then, well, you better hope that you're Westrise. So
Yeah,
unless you have these picks, it's not seen too often. But we have seen the Zed against specific matchups, specifically the LeBlanc. I mean, it's interested to see exactly how this does against Ziggs, because, again, that's not really a matchup we've seen, and Ziggs offers way more poke than LeBlanc. However, the all-in from Zed could be just as strong.
I mean, take our minds back to yesterday. The series between SK Prime against Triple LOL. Zed was kind of huge in that series. If you remember that they couldn't itemize against the Zed because it just was too late into the game, too early into the game to have enough armor to combat that damage. And if Exile can get the ball rolling again, this could be a repeat of that. But this time, it's a tank top laner on the side of Unicorns of Love, whereas JWoww is playing a heavily damage-focused top laner. So they should, in theory, be able to fight a little bit tougher against that Zed.
And the difference between LeBlanc and Zed and Ziggs and Zed is that Ziggs doesn't have to completely roam to a different lane to be effective. He can just throw out the Mega Inferno bomb and at least he's contributed. But LeBlanc has to go all the way down, and she can't back out, because if she does, then Zed's going to kill her.
Yeah, and Ziggs, I have to feel that without pushing too far into lane, should be safer. In the early game against Zed, shouldn't take as much harass. Obviously, this is all theory crafting, and it all depends on the lane spacing of the mid laners. So Ziggs, while Zed will do well after level 6, being able to all in, should be fairly safe when playing a passive lane.
Absolutely. So let's take another look at one of the other lanes, or maybe even the junglers, because we've had Olaf picked up, and that's going to be going against Gragas. And when Olaf gets ahead in the jungle, he basically stays ahead. He's more of like a control jungler. He'll just sit in the opposing jungle. And Gragas really isn't a person who can go one-on-one against people, especially against an Olaf. So if Olaf picks up one kill against Gragas or anyone else, then it's not going to get better.
It depends on where and when they take the trades. Gragas with mana can actually deal quite a lot of damage in the jungle, even in the early game, because his barrels do quite a lot, body slam will do a lot, he'll get that extra attack damage from using his W, and it's one of those things that it really depends on if these junglers meet, when and where they meet, and that's what we'll be looking for in this game.
Okay, so down at the bot lane, we've got the Vayne pickup, and this is something we haven't seen very much of, and they must feel very comfortable actually to bring that in. We're going to be jumping to the lone screen very shortly, but how is it going to actually face the opposing lane? Because Vayne, of course, has a weaker laning phase. Yeah,
Vayne needs quite a bit of help in the laning phase to make sure you get through it. But obviously, once you get through the laning phase, then she's Vayne and is a hyper carry. So if they can protect Vayne using Thresh, which is a decent pairing there for Vayne, it means that you can get a hook, look for the condemn, and land damage, maybe even pick up a kill from that. If you can protect Vayne to get through the laning phase, then certainly SK Prime will have a better late game using that Vayne, and Zed will do a good chunk of damage in the late game as well, provided he can itemize through the mid game to get there. So it's one of those things that they've got a lot of late game damage. It just depends whether Unicorns of Love let them get there.
Yeah, they haven't sacrificed anything to get that Vayne pick either. Sometimes you'll have like a protector AD carry composition, and if Vayne doesn't get rolling, then there's no point running it. But they haven't. They haven't sacrificed anything. They've got the Graggers, they've got the Zed. They're still going to be dealing damage. But in the early game, they're going to have a really rough time. And against Olaf, who can snowball out of control, there's lots of picks here that can really cause some serious damage. Ziggs is going to be poking out his lane opponent. Lucian and Leona is one of the most aggressive bot laners. Lucian's always going to want to be trading.
Yeah.
Vayne can get out of the piercing light if she's quick with Tumble, but I'm not sure if that's enough to get them to mid-late game.
And we've seen the bottom lane pairing of Unicorns of Love trading very well in the lane. And I think that's something that they have to be careful with this Vayne in the lane is if Vayne takes too much damage from early trades, then it's all up in the air.
Yeah.
And everything's up in the air right now. We're 1-0 up for Unicorns of Love. Let's head on to Summoner's Rift for game number 2 here of our second semi-final for the FACEIT Challenger Invitational.
So SK Gaming have to win this game to even this one up, and they're not looking all that good. The first game went very convincingly to the team of Unicorns of Love. No one really made a mistake, but Perry is on, I want to say, a more consistent jungler, but he's on Gragas. He's on a jungler who won't die as fast as Pantheon, but definitely won't deal the same amount of damage. That was an interesting interaction with Vardax as he moved near Renekton.
It's one of those things that Gragas is a little bit more consistent than Pantheon, but both are very obscure junglers, and I wonder how that's going to affect this game. I think SK actually looked fairly decent in the first game. I just think that Unicorns of Love were that little bit more consistent in the game. And really, I've said that word so much of consistent and consistency, but that's what separates the top teams from any other challenger team, is being able to do what you can do best again and again, no matter who you're facing.
It's like you need the right blend of players, and that needs to be consistent. Like if you put them in a blender, then you want the right consistency of players.
That's I don't want to put any players in a blender, but
well, no. I mean the metaphorical blender of League of Legends.
Okay, good. We were stemming into strange territory there. I thought we were, Anyway, consistency is the key in competitive League of Legends, and seemingly everybody is solidly buying Doran shields right now. This is very similar to what we've seen before. Zed buying a Doran shield in the middle lane. We saw that yesterday. Top laners both building Doran shield. And supports. So, a lot of tanky items to begin this game, which is exactly what you'd expect.
Yeah, we see this all the time. Action's going to happen in the bottom lane, and most of that damage is going to be from auto attack, so supports are going to pick those up. Top laners are top laners. There's no point trying to kill your opponent because that won't happen. And if you start building a Duran's blade, then you're going to be, in fact, the one dying despite being more aggressive. That's just kind of how the top lane rolls at the moment. But no real aggression just yet, which is to be expected. Hylissang won't try to dive on 6. This is exactly what the matchup we saw last time, in fact, between the supports. But he won't be aggressing onto him just yet until he's got his abilities.
Yeah, with slightly different AD carries, it does change the lane a little bit with the aggressive nature of it, as we talked about Vayne. A little susceptible to trading early on. That mid lane matchup is a little bit different to what we've seen in the normal matchups. We've seen a lot of Grags, but there's the engage in the bottom.
There's the level 2. Zavan already taking a lot of damage, and the piercing light comes through. He's got the level 2. He will have an extra bit of regen, a bit of extra HP, but already looking good in this lane.
Yeah, that was a big trade there, and they forced Vayne to use the pots there. Vayne is slightly ahead in CS, but they've got to be careful that she doesn't get engaged upon, because another engagement like that would send Vayne back, and there's no way of sustaining up.
And Mr. of Sheepy was dropped very low by that white, almost claiming another victim, and he should be able to pick up this blue if indeed he's got it, and he will be taking a longer route is what he went. He actually went red into the wolves and then the white. That's actually quite a lot for him to handle. But he's Olaf, and he should be able to sustain himself back up with the extra attack speed.
I think it's one of those things that I believe he went to Wraiths as the middle camp between his two buffs.
Okay.
And if you do that, you actually... Wraiths deal a little bit less damage, take a little bit less as well. So you're able to farm through it a little bit faster to hit that level. They also give less experience as such, but it's one of those ways of moving around the jungle in a different way. But to be honest, I didn't actually catch which rotation he used there.
Yeah, he definitely went to wolves because they were cleared, but we'll see what he does. I think he's just farming his jungle at this stage. There's no reason to go into Gragas' jungle, especially when he's at the stage where he can probably go toe-to-toe with Olaf until he starts getting his own items.
Now, this top lane is where a surprising amount of action happened in the beginning of the game, in game 1 of this series, where, you know, ultimately Visage actually would land a kill. This time, junglers have converged on the bottom. Are they going to go straight in?
There's the initiation from Hylissang. He's going to be flattened by Perry as he comes in from the side. It's going to be Master of GP. Just deal some damage and knock back with Condemn. That's going to be the end of that engagement. No one wants to go too deep, but Hylissang will most likely be pushed out of this lane.
The difference there was Ghost was used and Flash in the bottom lane. Ghost from Master of Sheepy, of course. The only thing that was expended on the side of SK Prime was the Ignite out of 6. So it means they're going to have a little less kill potential, but with that escape being down on Hylissang, that leaves Leona a little bit vulnerable.
Still has the Ignite, so it definitely has the kill potential, and the Ignite is down from Perry, but it's not going to jump in just yet. So Leona now has all of her abilities, and there we go. Perry has come in for round 2. That's definitely going to be the kill onto Leona, and that's going to be first blood onto Zavan.
And that's what they're looking for here with this Vayne lane. They needed that extra assistance from the jungler to make sure they picked up the first kill, and that will go quite a long way here for SK Prime to last through the mid game and get Vayne to the point where she can survive. You can see Zodiaz is taking a lot of harass here, and this is what he can't afford to do because Exile will start to zone him, and it's not something that Ziggs can really contend with.
He'll have to go back at some point between now and level 6, because otherwise Deathmark comes in and he will just straight up die at that HP. You kind of hit that threshold, and he's going to have to recall, and that means 100% Exile will be level 6 before Zodiaz hits it.
And he's not got a lot of time either. He's just recalled, and Exile has just hit level 6, so good timing on the recall out of Zodiaz. He's going to have to get himself a little bit more farm. That's an interesting build. He's gone for the tier of the Goddess, and that seems like quite a greedy build here against a Zed. It'll give you a shield in the end. I have a feeling that when playing Ziggs, Skara did this. In North American LCS, picked up a tier of the Goddess, played very greedy, went flat damage, and skipped out on Zhonya's for as long as possible, because if I remember the way he talked about it, was the whole point of building greedy is he just needs to get the damage down, and it doesn't matter whether in team fights he's dived on by Zed, because then Zed is in one place and they can follow up with the rest of the team fight. So as long as he lands damage, but he's got to be careful he doesn't die, he should be okay.
It was a great juke out of the body slam, which actually took Gragas off to the side instead, but of course he doesn't really need the Fiend's Unholy Grail for the magic resistance he's against an AD laner, but the tier is definitely stacking up towards the later stages of the game, and I'm not sure if they want to be gearing up for the late stages of the game, because they know at that point SK are going to be even stronger because of Vayne and because of Zed.
In fact, I think this was the exact lane matchup that was in that game. If I'm remembering rightly, it was a good few weeks ago now, but it was Dignitas versus Cloud9, where Dignitas would upset Cloud9, and everyone was like, okay, Ziggs against Zed, Ziggs should lose this. And Skara just played incredibly greedy, got a lot of AP, so he was dealing massive amounts of damage and then dying, which ended up being fine for him. We'll see if it plays out the same way again, but you saw in that gank attempt, Ziggs just dealt a significant amount of damage to Exile.
In many ways, having your mid laner drop after they've used all of their damage, like the Ignite comes down, the Mega Inferno bomb, and the rest of it, then, well, they've had their contribution to the team fight, so they're not going to be doing much more than that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously not dying is preferential, but as you say, as long as they've got all of their abilities off, then I think it's okay as long as you come out ahead.
So, in the bot lane, haven't had an engagement for quite a while. Leona's quite aware of the fact that Flame is going to completely eliminate the effectiveness of Zenith Blade. So, Vayne is farming pretty well, 69 CS versus 62 from Vardag's currently. That's going to be evened up, but that extra kill has definitely put them ahead, and as a result, they haven't really been able to push Vayne out. And just the fact that she's even and slightly ahead is exactly where SK wants to be.
And looking again up at this top lane, you can see Visage actually with the early lead over Mozilla. This time hasn't had the early kill, so we'll see how it translates from this slight lead into the rest of the game. But you can see in the middle lane as well, Exile, a bit of a greedy play of his own. They know that Ziggs has gone off to get the blue, so he's going to steal away the Wraiths.
He does get it and heads back into the mid lane. We've got Deathmark, but he doesn't have all of his energy, so can't use the entire combination. But Zodiaz, with that blue buff, quite happy to spam out those bouncing bombs all day.
Yeah, and of course, when going in to engage against a full health target, doesn't matter, bottom lane hook lands.
Death Sentence comes in, and now Hylissang goes for the re-engage. Eclipse comes out, Vardag just procs the Sunlight passive, and we go back to laning, but Perry is coming in from the backside, and we'll be jumping towards enemy territory, just going and trading against Exile. It might be enough damage. He's going to jump out with the death mark from this original point, and we'll be getting out of this one. And now he's just kind of in the jungle.
That was an amazing juke out. We caught the tail end of it. Zodiaz managed to get around, but an engage in the bottom lane again.
Hylissang lands the Shield of Daybreak onto 6. Throws down the lantern off to the side of Zavan, wants to jump back into that fight.
Zodiaz was almost 100% dead there. There was so little way of him getting away from that, but sidestepped the body slam, and that was just an incredible juke.
Yeah, I actually didn't catch it because the camera panned away. I was like,
yeah.
I need to see the end of this fight.
He juked and recalled in the bush because Zed was forced back into the lane from the Mega Atomic Bomb, the Mega Inferno Bomb, forced him to use Living Shadow back out. So he didn't get the follow-up damage to get Deathmark to proc. Then Gragas came in, but Master Sheepy was already between Gragas and Ziggs and had to back away. That was insanely good play by Ziggs.
It's just amazing. We just don't expect this to happen from a team like these guys, but they've demonstrated time and time again, not only are they solid in their lanes, but they do some pretty damn good stuff as well.
Some flashy tricks. I've still got a smile on my face from that because that was a brilliant juke. Engage again in the bottom.
There we go. Lands the Shield of Daybreak. More harassment than anything. But there's the box. Six is trying to commit to this one, but doesn't even land the edge onto these guys. So that's the ultimate quite literally going to waste.
Once again, lanes are for the most part drawing even. Really only the kill separates the teams. But when you think of overall there's a kill in the game, but the gold is even, that tells you how close these teams are.
Solar Flare comes down and also whiffs, so both of the supports use their ultimates to literally no effect, but Gragas against Master of Sheepy, and Olaf at this stage will definitely win that fight, but he cannot just kind of squeeze through trees like Gragas can.
Okay, so Zodiaz's build is a little less greedy than Skara's, but another engage in the bottom.
Zavan has popped Final Hour, trying to go underneath this turret. He is at that Sanctuary. Hylissang is still in this fight, but there is no follow-up from the jungler. That will be the end of it, but that's going to be Unicorns of Love significantly behind in that trade. Meanwhile, in the mid lane, Harry ultimate comes down, knocks him against the wall, looks to jump over his own wall. Exile jumps over Master of the Sheepy. Mega Inferno Bomb comes across, doesn't pick up the kill just yet, and has jumped all the way back to mid lane using Deathmark. And everyone just backs off again.
Zodiaz is so good at escaping. Every time he saves the Mega Inferno Bomb for the exact moment where Zed wants to go aggressive to land the kill, but cannot, because he's already got Exile low enough that Inferno Bomb will 100% kill him. So he's forced back out of the fight. And Zodiaz is getting away from trades where he really shouldn't. He's now gone for a Seeker's Arm Guard, so it's less greedy than the tier into Rabadons that we saw out of Skara. I actually like this because it'll give him survivability. It'll reduce his damage a little bit, but he's doing so well at keeping up in this lane that I think he's fine to do this.
And he doesn't need to upgrade that into a Serap's Embrace just yet.
Yeah.
He's quite happy just to carry on stacking that tier until later on into the game, and then he'll pick up the Seraphs. But right now, the Seeker's Arm Guard, he'll stack that up, and it will just make it even harder for Exile to pick up the kill, because it doesn't done too much at this stage. He picked up the Brutalizer for the extra early game damage, and which will be going into the Black Cleaver later on, but hasn't done too much. Hasn't opted for the Blade of the Ruin King alternative.
There's a bit of an item offset down in the bottom lane. You can see the finished item with the Blade of the Ruin King has been completed on Vayne. However, Lucian does not have a finished Bloodthirster yet, so his damage isn't as high as it should be when you consider the itemization. At this point, Gragas is coming down to the bottom lane. They're looking for another pick to get Vayne even more fed. Unicorns of Love have to be careful here that Gragas doesn't sneak into lane and land an explosive cast, because it'll be difficult. There's no flash available on Lucian.
If explosive cast comes down, they're not going to get out again. Like, Box will come out, the Death Sentence will come down, the Flay as well. Literally, Six by himself will keep a person locked up, and then you've got Condemn to keep them in the right place. Double pings come onto Gragas, so they know exactly where he is, and the gank really isn't going to happen, but they still have that slight advantage just because of that small spike in gold. When both of these guys went back, she could pick up the full item, but Lucian couldn't.
It is time for the Dragon, however. They've seen Ziggs move over towards the blue buff, so Olaf is not in position to contest this. Mega Inferno Bomb, a little bit late, but I think for being blind after the wards was cleared out, good attempt.
Yeah, it was. Smite came down just in the nick of time, and half a second earlier would have been great. But as you said, it was completely blind, and Hylissang not going to quite get hit by the hook, but still, it's Fresh being the one who's aggressive, and Hylissang is not able to be the aggressor. But top lane, though, Sheepy goes for this tower dive. Mozilla's under his turret. There's no way he's going to get out of this. That's actually Sheepy picking up that kill. Vix actually would have liked that, but Hylissang gets slammed against the wall. Savan picks up that kill. Vardag's still not in good shape. They won't go for the tower dive, but still, another kill onto Vayne is not a bad thing. In fact, it went to Thresh.
Yeah, that one actually went to Thresh, and they may end up losing a turret for it. The top lane fight, you're tanking that. Sheepy, okay.
He's good.
I'm going to go with he knew his limits.
He was at the point where he had to commit, because he would have run away and definitely died. So he was like, I hope the tower's going to die in time. But it increased the attack speed the lower he went in HP. So
that is true. And that whole top lane engagement, and Visage actually nice flash away from the body slam. Explosive cask still available.
Doesn't really have that much damage. He is a jungle Gragas, and Perry will definitely be chasing after. The flash comes down into the barrel roll, looking for the next body slam. Vigasachi just dancing around him. Quickly take a drink while he goes for the next engage for the extra attack damage. He will be stunning down. Ruthless Predator comes out. Those two caster minions are doing work. There's the body slam, and Perry picks up the kill.
He didn't get much life steal from that at all, from that final kill. The Meek just wasn't able to life steal enough. He's playing a little bit aggressive. Zed is actually roaming down to the bottom lane here and looking for more.
Van follows up. Condemn comes off to the side. There's the Deathmark. That's definitely one dead target. Hylissang tries to jump back to the turret using Exile, but Zavan is going to be the one tanking. Hook comes across. That's the double kill for Zed, and Master Sheepy just mops up Hal, picks up one. 2-for-1 trade overall.
2-for-1 overall, but neither of the kills went over to Vayne, and you have to think that even though Zed has roamed down to that bottom lane to assist in those kills, they would have been more useful on Vayne. We'll see whether they can pick up any more, but Vayne certainly needs more help in this game to get towards the late game. She is ahead, but with a Vayne, it's always nice to get more and more ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And 1-1 and 3, Blaze Ruin King on his way to the next attack speed item, and Zodiaz again just gets out of mid lane, seemingly apparently unkillable. But Zodiaz, unlike Skara, has opted to go for the Lasagna's Hourglass even sooner than usual.
Yeah, it's going to lower his damage, but any item that contains a needlessly large rod will provide quite a significant amount of AP. So it's lower than a Rabadon's, but still considerable damage and will help Zodiaz here. Exile spent a lot of time out of lane there. Will have gold to spend after picking up those kills, but there's the Blade of the Ruin King. That'll give him added mobility, and he actually bought that straight out pretty much. He only had one longsword, so that was pretty...
Stayed in lane for quite a while.
Quite a lot of gold that he picked up there.
It was a long time since he had gone back, plus he picked up those 2 kills, which also helped the double kill at bot lane, and also that damage will be amplified by Deathmark, so all around it will synergize with Zed's kit. These guys got to go back to laning phase, so this time it's going to be SK with the advantage, and this is probably the biggest trial that we need to see from the team of Unicorns of Love. We haven't really seen them massively on the back foot yet.
Well, saying that, they're only 500 gold behind now, and you look at it, and most of it is in those kills. There's 3 kills separate, which theoretically should be 900 gold, but they're farming pretty well. So they've managed to offset 400 gold of their deficit by being able to farm in lane, and of course with the objective. They do have that one turret over SK Prime, so You know, there's a bit of a back and forth on the gold across the lanes and the objectives. And it's one of those things that until we head into the middle game and it settles into the team fights, then we'll start seeing the bigger leads come out.
And we're going to need to see Unicorns of Love do something to shut down Vayne, and that's going to be jungler presence in the bot lane. However, that was a big rotation. They pick up mid tower, and they're going to pick up the kill onto Fresh. The Van's going to try and pick up the kill onto Vardags, and everyone's congregating around the bot lane. Mundo teleports in. That's going to be a kill onto Lucian and a kill onto Fresh. Master of Sheepy, there's no way he's going to get out of this. He is just going to turn around, deal some damage, but this is a two-man push in the mid lane.
They had far too much focus on Vayne there. They expended on Thresh. They didn't even get Vayne at all. Vanillan was just able to mop up. And they chased down 6 with no regard for Vayne. And Vayne started picking people off. Explosive Cast pushed Vardags into the turret, so ended up picking him off. And overall, that's 2 turrets apiece, but the kills go over to SK Prime. They extend their lead now up to 2,000 gold.
And these guys probably will find each other. That's red buff falling to Savan, but Renekton and Ziggs, they're actually congregating around this area. I'm not sure if they can collapse in time. That's going to be a no. Mundo heads in from the top sides, and now Renekton might be in poor shape. Everyone is recalling in that watered brush, and we're going to go for round 2. Exile is dropped very low. And now Vizik's actually trying to just finish off that kill. Dominus comes up. There's the deathlock. See if he can kill him before he actually gets killed by his aggressor. He will do the former. Hylissang jumps in, but he's got no real support. The Ignite comes down. He's getting absolutely destroyed with the double kill coming in for Zed. Mozilla is still going 1 versus 2 versus Zodiaz and Sheepy. Zavan has now evened up the odds. Gragas comes in from the side. Vardags comes in from over the wall. Picks up 1. This is now 3 versus 2. But some of these members have already been taken out of commission. And Master of Sheepy, nowhere to go. That's what happens when you take Ghost.
That was, again, ignoring Vayne. You cannot ignore Vayne, and the timing on that is such that SK will consolidate this lead into a dragon. Vayne may not have had the most damage before that fight, but now has a Phantom Dancer to go alongside the Blade of the Ruined King, and they focus so hard on Zed. Again, they're just focusing the wrong targets in these team fights. They need to start looking at Vayne, because the problem with ignoring a Vayne is Vayne starts picking up kills and will snowball through the game. Vayne's now up to 8 assists alongside those 3 kills, so has a significant amount of gold now and is ahead in farm as well.
We said how they're a strong late game team, but if they get more kills, then they're going to hit late game sooner, comparably in this game. And we're already rapidly approaching that. 5-0-1 is the current scoreline for Zed. 3-2-8 on those 2 big carries, and those looking really, really good. And then just not being able to get focus in these fights. He's going to go and find Vigasachi. And Vigasachi just knows from that last team fight he can't fight Exile.
Yeah, well, I think he can fight him alone or even with Master Sheepy around, but with Vayne there, no dice, because that's a lot of damage.
That's going to be the 2 versus 2. That's a shutdown. Mega Inferno Bomb comes across and completely west, but Hylissang has evened up the fight into a 3 versus 2 and picks up both of these guys. So as much as we were talking about how strong they are, well, they both died.
Yeah, the problem is they went aggressive onto 2 fairly tanky members. Had Olaf not been there, or Leona, Exile would have got the kill onto Master of Sheepy there. Took him, sorry, onto Vizichachi with that death mark on. This has opened up the middle lane though, so they may be able to take this. It looks like they'll get it before Ziggs can clear that out. Mozilla's tanky enough that he doesn't really care too much, but they run out of damage. They run out of damage, so they're not able to get it.
Run out of damage and run dry of minions, so Zodiaz successfully defends this mid turret and will carry on living. So that's going to be 3-3 on the current turret. And as long as he can keep that alive, it's going to keep them still even on those objectives.
The problem is SK tried to push more in the top lane. I believe they took the turret down in that, but ended up dying for it. Now we're at a point where we're actually not too often in games where it's 3 turrets apiece, and one of them is an inhibitor, an inner turret for SK Prime. They already have the map control in the bottom side of the map, whereas it's the outer towers for Unicorns of Love. Now, how will they use that added map control? A little bit of a mind game there from Mozilla.
And because that's technically a dash rather than a blink, you can actually disrupt them while they're going through Dark Passage.
Yeah.
We've seen that before by Bolt Breaker, but Vizik's actually trying to fight Zavan, or more accurately, running away from Zavanian. And now Mozilla is actually caught in no man's land. The hook lands onto Olaf and actually just doesn't do anything because he is Ragnarok. Going to be using the Ziggs minefield to completely zone them away from this fight, cutting up this fight completely. There's the Mega Inferno Bomb, picks up the kill onto Mozilla. Master of CP and Zodiaz are so incredibly low, but there comes the Zoniz. He will eventually go down. Finally, they can just pin down that Yordle, but Hylissang is in the wrong jungle, and Zavan will eventually pick up a double kill.
And this is another... Well, this is a poor choice of lane positioning here from Unicorns of Love. Vardags was down in the bottom lane. I don't know why they'd send Vardags to be the one to fend off Zed, because he can't fight Zed.
Yeah, it's not like a sacrificial offering to a god, where it's just like, if we give you Lucian, will you leave us alone?
Nobody... Yeah, well, no AD carry for Vardags could fight that at that point. That's not a lane matchup he can win. They're looking for the Baron here. Should get it.
Yeah, they do indeed. That was an attempt to try and just poke them away, and, well, good luck, Vardags. Actually, Vizix actually jumps over the wall, and that definitely spooks Exile, and he just backs on off with Deathmark.
Yeah, I think they'll be happy to get the Baron there. Just back off. Yep. Make sure that they're not overstepping, because, I mean, SK are down 1 in this series, and losing this one would put them out of the tournament and put Unicorns of Love in the finals. So SK need to play this one out safely, and they're well ahead here. They have themselves nearly an 8,000 gold lead, but they have to be careful they don't take the wrong engagements, because Unicorns of Love can still fight back into this one. The biggest difference, though, is that the team compositions favor SK Prime heavily as we head into this late game.
Absolutely, but we have seen before, specifically when we see a hard engaged support like Leona, when you start sieging these turrets, Leona lands a solar flare in the wrong place onto 3 members, hits perhaps mid lane and maybe one of their tanks, and they lose a huge portion, and then you can re-engage very easily, because it's not like SK can go forwards, but they only have to go backwards, and it gives the home field advantage to Unicorns of Love.
Unicorns of Love have a big problem, though, at the fact that Vayne is already at Vayne's point in the game. Blade of the Rune King, Phantom Dancer, Last Whisper. That's what she needs. Everything else is the rest of her team peeling and her getting the Silver Bolts procs to land that additional damage. And when you look at the AD carry for Unicorns of Love, there's not even a finished Trinity Force on Lucian, and it means he cannot output anywhere near as much damage as Vayne can right now.
They don't have the damage, and typically you'd say, well, at least the jungler's doing well, he's fairly tanky, but you're against Vayne. It doesn't matter how tanky you build, percent true damage cuts through everything. And
again, they're sending Lucian down to the bottom lane to try and deal with Zed, and he can't do that alone. There is no possible way he can fight that fight. Zed will kill him. Somebody else needs to go down there either with Lucian, at which point you give away a numbers advantage, or they need to send Vizicachi, but Vizicachi even took a lot of damage from Zed.
I think the only person who could viably do that is Master of Sheepy, but he's kind of needed a lot in the mid lane just to keep them back. Undertow is actually one of their biggest forms of wave clear on top of Ziggs, and he's kind of just needed there. It's going to be Leona and Vardags kind of pushing away Exile, but again, numbers advantage are going to SK. They're currently holding them at arm's length, but it's not going to carry on indefinitely.
The problem is they went for that greedy build on Ziggs, but hasn't actually made it into an Archangel staff, so he's not getting any bonus AP from his mana that he's accumulated. He's only got the extra mana, whereas you need that additional AP to make that gold investment worth it at all. If it gets to a point where he never gets to convert it, then that item had almost no effect on Ziggs this game.
Ziggs has to go back to base, and now he's coming back, but 270 farm is pretty respectable at 27 minutes. He has been farming incredibly well, but Zavan, no one can duel Exile, and no one can duel Zavan either. So Zavan is just basically creating that weak point on the map where people are trying to congregate around the area and clear out this minion wave. Zilla's going to be pulled back from the mid lane using that lantern, the Dark Passage, but over time, they will just lose these towers. Zavan doesn't even need minions just to poke at that tower once in a while, and that's all he really needs to do. Sheepy is also getting chunked at the same rate as the tower, and there's the hook onto the mid lane. They're going to go for the engage in multiple different locations. Vizicachi is dropped low, but he should be good to go. That's Vayne dropping incredibly low herself, but Exile jumps all the way out. Master of Sheepy and Vardags are committing very hard to this one, but they do really want this kill. Piercing Light will do that, but they will be cut off in rotation. Mega Inferno Bomb seals Exile and Mozilla. Everyone's splitting up from SK.
And somehow Unicorns of Love have picked the fights they needed to here. They've taken out Vayne, they've taken out Zed, and that's all of the damage. Here comes the re-engagement. That's a big explosive cask. Will knock Ziggs out of the fight and end this engagement.
Still, 2-0, massively against the wall. How did that even happen?
It was all to do with the way they rotated around. They finally put people that could fight against Zed in there. Lantern comes out. One of the things is Zodiaz is able to push the wave away from Zed and deal quite a big amount of damage. Visage actually just soaked a lot of damage against Zed, managed to even get back to the fountain. Zed was diving incredibly deep into the base. Meanwhile, top lane Vayne ended up dying in a 2v1, as you'd pretty much expect. And SK just didn't do anything with their members in mid. Didn't rotate anywhere that was significant to prevent that from happening.
Then they ended up rotating top lane when it was too late, and then they just kind of got caught out and didn't do anything. So Baron being 1 minute 40 will be the fact that that's going to drag Unicorns of Love out of their base. And then we really see the crunch time, because right there, okay, they have the base advantage and they can kind of hold themselves out. But when they're at Baron, the question is, do they try and contest that? Do they just concede it? At which point that siege that we just saw will happen again, but this time will most likely be successful with that Baron buff.
There's a couple of items that were just picked up at the tail end of that fight. There's now a Thornmail on Olaf, so he's going to return a lot of the damage that will be dealt to him by this team. Of course, going against a heavy AD composition. They do have Gragas, so they've got that AP mixed in there. This is quite a powerful Gragas build here with quite a lot of AP. The Thornmail will protect quite a bit in these fights. Svanillan is going to face check too.
He's going to be facing down Vixasachi and Vardags and misses the jump over the wall. As the Ziggs ult and picks up that kill. So that has delayed Vayne for exactly the Baron timer, in fact. So that could hurt them. It's going to take Vayne some time to get from base. If they can get themselves another kill, that would be fantastic. Exile did manage to take away the red buff from them. The axe won't quite land. Mozilla responds with an axe. That's going to be the Xenoblade barely missing Mozilla. And there's the Dark Passage getting him to safety. It
buys them the map control to clear Baron. There aren't actually too many wards out there from SK Gaming Prime anyway. So, I mean, there's a couple of seconds here for them to position around Baron. They risk it getting stolen away because Perry has 2 high damage ways of taking Baron. He can use the explosive cask or smite if he manages to get all the way into the pit. Unicorns of Love can choose to do Baron here, and I believe they are actually doing it. You can see it at the top left side of your screen. Will the response come out from SK? They're positioning for it.
They're going to give it a shot, and they're going to go for the team fight instead. Everyone is just completely clustered up. The Gragas battle hits everyone, and everyone from Unicorns of Love does get disintegrated. The ultimate comes down from Ziggs. It's just not going to be enough. Ziggs has not quite fallen into the death chamber. Exler is the only one to fall, but that is the clean ace. That's going to be SK surely taking this game.
They still have a little bit of... Yeah, it's going to be a surrender. I was going to say, they've got a little bit to do, but a heavy AD comp is going to be able to push that through and deal significant damage. And that was, you know, convincing out of SK. They got ahead in their lanes in mid and AD carry position and just ended up being able to push that one through. They were just a little too strong, which is exactly what we saw against Triple LOL yesterday.
And they ran a composition that would progressively get stronger. So as long as the game carried on going, then they would win eventually because of Vayne and because of Zed. It just didn't really work out from Unicorns of Love. But they did pull themselves back into the game at several points, even though by all means they shouldn't have.
Yeah, I mean, Unicorns of Love went for the Baron at the end, which I think was one of the plays they had to make. Had they taken Baron safely and not had that team fight go against them, that actually put them in fairly decent standing. They still have to deal with a Vayne in the late game, but Baron buff does help against that. The problem they had was they stacked for an explosive cask that chunked everybody. There was no escaping that. They all got taken so low. Vayne wasn't even needed in that fight.
That was kind of the team fight that they went for. There was a composition, and they had to all be clustered around each other, which didn't help when Gragas was so tanky and well, actually not so tanky, but dealing so much damage from the jungle. Typically, you don't see a jungle Gragas itemize so much damage, but because of how the game went, he just had gold to spend on a death cap and also the Zhonya's Hourglass. So that was the second game, evening up to 1-1 with Unicorns of Love and SK Gaming. I'm going to be jumping into the third game very shortly, and, well, it all comes down to this game.
Yeah, we'll see how this series ends. We're one apiece here at the FACEIT Challenger Invitational. Stick with us. We'll be back in a couple of minutes with game number 3.